Hello, Internet, and hello, Racket Media, and don't bury the lead. I don't know why I'm saying hello to the place that we're coming live from, but I'm Dave Colon, reporter at Streets Blog. It's a website devoted to livable streets, mass transit, pushing all the cars in the river, making New York City streets a much better place to be. And joining me today is Chelsea Yamada, an organizer in Manhattan with Transportation Alternatives, an organization that shares similar goals to the coverage that we do. And we're here today to talk about the street that Don't Bury the Lead is right outside of, Canal Street, a pretty gross car sewer of a street that is not really a great welcoming place when you first come into the city, but it is unfortunately the first thing that you see sometimes. So Chelsea, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dave, for having me. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody at Racket.
So first, I mean, what are there? There's this thing that Transportation Alternatives does. You're involved in. It's called Fix Canal. What is that?
Well, like the historic streets that once were built in all parts of Manhattan, Canal Street was a very unique place. It literally was a canal. But unlike most streets, it is what we would call a boulevard of death, not a neighborhood street today. It's had a long history, but a lot of what we see in Manhattan and New York City streets citywide is a vestigial road design. So once Canal Street was paved over from a towpath where you could actually have boats and water movement, we got cars and space for cars, and Transportation Alternatives Fix Canal advocates are looking to identify and elevate the many problems with congestion, gridlock that we see today on Canal Street, converting what we would call this Boulevard of Death, a place that is more like a highway than a neighborhood street, and converting it into a place for pedestrians and cyclists to come first.
Here, there have been over 2,500 crashes between the Manhattan Bridge and Hudson Street since 2016 on Canal Street. 54 injured cyclists and one was killed. There have been 109 pedestrians injured, and one was just killed this weekend. 229 motorists also. 13 cyclist deaths, 13 total deaths over the last decade. And you call it the Boulevard of Death. So, aside from all of those reasons, why fix Canal?
Yeah, I'm sorry to feel a little tone deaf on the safety issue. It's something that comes across my desk constantly, as I'm sure you're aware. Some of the reasons I started reading Streets Blog in the beginning were because a lot of people, whether they just walk across the street, especially a street like Canal Street, feel very desensitized, right? As a pedestrian, we wake up in the mornings and we are sick of looking over our shoulders. We're sick of thinking about how unsafe these conditions are. And even though it's so important to have these safety statistics that prove that this is a boulevard of death, I think most people, when they're thinking about whether Canal Street is a viable place for a redesign, for an alternative, for some sort of change, it really resonates with them, this feeling that I can't even get across the street, Dave. This is awful. It's a miserable place to be, whether it be the awful noise pollution, the quality of air, these poor residents who really have to put up with this on a regular basis, creating creative means of getting across the street, such as going downstairs into a subway station to avoid street-level traffic altogether. A really fun confluence of transit meets street design advocacy. But people really don't want to cross Canal Street. And whether you said, just like you said, people enter Manhattan, whether it be from New Jersey on one side or Brooklyn, Queens from another, they're going to come out via the Manhattan Bridge or the Holland Tunnel and come out onto this chaotic mess, which is just a boulevard, a highway, again, to repeat myself there, but just really getting into this like inhumane street environment. So something I notice on other boulevards of death, we've seen some successes with street redesigns. The mayor was elected and promised to fix Queens Boulevard. He did an excellent job bringing quality of life improvements, making it a boulevard of life on a former boulevard of death. But the other major roadways, namely Northern Boulevard in Queens, where I live, for example, and commute. These streets, they're common sense. You just look at it and you go, this is not a neighborhood environment. This is not a pedestrians first area, and heck no, cycling on it seems like a bad idea. It's common sense, but they take a lot of political urgency, which is why we're trying to create a campaign to highlight some of those livability concerns.
I didn't realize that people do that. They really cross from, like, they get on one side of the subway and they just walk underneath.
It's really a lot safer, Dave. You should try it. It takes a lot of stairs, a lot of calories to burn.
I know. I guess the health benefits are maybe
Yeah.
we're discounting those. So you keep returning to this term, neighborhood street, versus what you've termed this as a Boulevard of Death, a highway kind of thing. I mean, what about the street physically would you say they have to fix? Like, what, there are cars going by all the time. I think there are 4 lanes for cars to drive in, a couple more to park in. So, like, what does one have to fix about this street?
Well, I think the design of Canal Street overall ebbs and flows. Like most streets, there's a little bit of give and take on the exact feet between one sidewalk curb and the next, block to block across the entire stretch of the corridor. For the most part, what we're saying is that there's a spatial dividend. You can really get a lot out of the roadway by repurposing some of those what we would call underutilized or ineffective uses of street space, i.e. public space, tragedy of the commons, the curbside loading zones or parking spaces can be repurposed to make more pedestrian areas. So number one solution for fixing Canal Street is to actually give pedestrians a more equitable share and proportion of our public space, right? Because it's all public. Although some people would argue that it's more public for some than for others. So we have a lot of wiggle room there. These are extra wide, in some cases, curbside lanes. So that means it's beyond the standard 8-foot parking spot that you're used to navigating if you're a driver, if you're so lucky to know how to do that. I'm a self-professed failed parallel parking person, but the extra 3 feet to make an 11-foot sized curbside loading space actually means that drivers can drive faster if it's a moving lane, which they do. They go in and out and try and sneak around each other when there's gridlock traffic. Anyway, you can repurpose that kind of contention zone and make it into, you can actually have amenities for the street. Councilmember Chin also agreed with us in her publication in the Tribeca Trib. She cites wider sidewalk expansions as being like a very easy greater good. But there's a lot more that can be done for public space amenities, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir a little bit with you. Do you want to go into some of those?
Well, I was going to ask. I mean, is there a vision that that either you personally have, or that the Transportation Alternatives has, the people working on this campaign, other than you, have for we know what happened with Queens Boulevard. There's that awesome bike lane. The city hasn't quite finished, but it's getting there, and it's way calmed down. And there have been maybe there were 0 deaths 1 year, I think. If I'm remembering correctly, on Queens Boulevard, after people called that Boulevard of Death. So, I mean, what, aside from wider sidewalks, like, what is there? Is there a vision of Canal Street fixed that you dream about when you go to sleep, or put on like a board and you point to people, you point and say, this is what we're working towards, everyone?
Sure. While I don't like to prescribe for anyone, I think the quality of life improvements that we don't really get to discuss in public forums or community board meetings or in op-eds are the outcomes of having more space for pedestrians. Cyclists, I think, would agree that bike lanes make everybody's life better. There are statistics to back that up, that crashes are reduced for all road users when you give road diets, neck downs, which is fewer feet for a driver to turn dangerously. But we're really trying to start with this foundation for eradicating dangerous vehicular movements, right? Car drivers are bearing the brunt of the responsibility for these traffic crashes that are hurting people. Drivers, not cyclists, drivers. And cyclists and pedestrians are bearing the brunt of the responsibility of being the recipients of those, serious injuries along this high crash corridor. And it's no surprise, Dave. I mean, you gave us a bunch of statistics over the past couple of years, but this has been an obvious problem for decades. So I don't want to underplay the significance of the foundational street design improvements that mitigate the nasty effects of having a car turn too fast. Left turn restrictions. It doesn't. Most pedestrians wouldn't be like, wow, I'm walking down the street and like, thank God there are left turn restrictions, yay. You don't notice it as much, but the drivers might notice because they're not gonna be able to make those movements. But left turns are statistically more dangerous, yielding, I believe, about 3 times as many serious injuries if there is a crash. So it's those little, pedestrian right-of-ways that make a huge difference. So that's one intersection treatment. We've got those, again, wider sidewalks or neck downs to calm and curb reckless driving behaviors. But yeah, it's not to scrap the benches that you could have to sit on or the bike parking amenities that are always last on the list when we get to street redesigns, right? You can have that beautiful bike lane and nowhere to put your bike. But I think we have to really begin with that foundational pedestrian-focused redesign that has space, that just carves out new opportunities for discussion of what the curb is being used for, whether it's commercial zones or pedestrian flow.
Right. So it's something that when even if somebody doesn't notice a left turn restriction if they're walking, they in some way will feel safer when they cross the street, because maybe if you do this every day, you start to notice, oh, I don't have to stop, look that way, wait to see if there's some kind of person, beating a yellow to get across 2 other lanes of traffic.
Absolutely.
And so so you're saying there's like putting down this kind of foundation for pedestrian improvements and pedestrianizing it. I mean, can you tell us what the status of the campaign is at the moment? Where are we at as far as, we started doing this or we're working towards that? Are you like battling it out in community boards? Are you going to the city directly to DOT and saying, come on, just like do something here? I mean, where are we at right now?
Well, Dave, I'm sure you're excited by the prospect of another community board meeting, which is, I'm sure, why you're asking that question. Yes, you can come to Manhattan Community Board 1, actually, on March 3rd, 2020. So there are about 5 weeks until grassroots volunteers who have come through the Fix Canal, transalt.org, Fix Canal /Fix Canal petition site. We have a website where people on the street were adding their name to make their voices known. But just like every good civic participant, going to the community board and saying, I want pedestrian zones, to a very serious group of community government representatives, local government representatives, it can feel a little daunting, but I would be remiss if I didn't advertise that meeting. The Transportation Committee will hear community presentation, so it's sponsored not by Transportation Alternatives, but by the grassroots. And we just got confirmation that we will see an agenda item for Canal Street. So I invite everyone to come out for that. And that's a great way to, meet your neighbors, talk about potential solutions. And I think rather than have a lot of prescriptions, what we'll see from the grassroots presentations that, have come up in other community boards is something that's more about highlighting the urgency around acting now. And that really is a strong testament to where you started off, Dave, with your observations about the serious number, the stark, dangerous conditions that we're seeing every day. And just this past weekend, someone was killed, a senior, 90 years old, unidentified, from we can't even get in touch with Bellevue yet to see, do we have an ID on the victim? Victims can't always come out for themselves. While I know Canal Street has enough victims that we will hear from some victims, the urgency is just so grave because people can't even tell their own stories anymore about how unsafe it is. But it is a really important distinction to note that, on Saturday during Chinese Lunar New Year, someone was killed. And it's not to say that story shouldn't be at the forefront of everybody's mind, but then once, life moves on, people are celebrating Lunar New Year, it's really easy for a community that's typically so invested in street redesigns to, take up the good juju of having a public holiday and saying, yeah, but let's focus on this person that was killed. So, these stories so often get lost, and especially pedestrian advocacy. The story of a pedestrian who was killed. It's not really a mode share moment, right, for a pedestrian. So that's why I think advocating for Canal Street and pedestrian safety is so, so important, despite, the wonders of things like Lunar New Year and so forth that are captivating the community on Canal Street right now. Happy
Right.
Year of the Rat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I like rats. They're great.
They're part of Canal Street. We have to
Yes.
maybe
Yeah, no, they're-
vestigial of another time and place on Canal. Maybe we gotta get rid of those rats.
I guess sure, but so they can be tough. But hey, I'm a fan of them a little bit. So you were talking about you're trying to get like a kind of grassroots from the ground up thing. You're not trying to tell people this is what you're gonna do on the street. I am curious though. I mean, were you a little disappointed when the city came out with the Green Wave plan? Canal Street was not featured on it or highlighted anyway. And for anybody who's unfamiliar, the Green Wave was Mayor de Blasio's plan to install a fully protected bike network by 2030 all across the city, which is a great thing. But in this important stretch, it just seemed like Canal kind of fell through the cracks. I mean, were you disappointed a little bit by that, or was this something that the campaign is so early to fix the street's basic problems that it's okay to kind of go, focus on other places?
I think there's nothing wrong with the corridors that the city Department of Transportation has highlighted as being problematic and falling under, greater jurisdiction to fix some streets in Brooklyn, for example. Awesome. So stoked. I think, in the office, these moments where master plans can work is just a rare chance to give each other a pat on the back. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of advocacy to get that far and to get on big government's radar. And I'm talking big local government. Ooh. But as far as Canal Street goes, I really want to shy away from the fact that, master planning isn't the only type of advocacy we can do, and deferring only to these kinds of long-winded visions that may or may not pan out over the course of many years, if not decades, or the kinds of investments that come out of a master plan. And the streets master plan might be a little bit different in the sense that there is some urgency, so not everything will be flushed out in cement. And maybe help me out here, Dave, with your feelings about interim safety redesigns, but bollards and paint. The City Department of Transportation has been very, very good about achieving a lot of safety redesigns lately. Queens Boulevard is part of it, but many common streets where one would walk, you'll see these. I wouldn't err on the side of calling them cheap, but they're cheaper. They're more affordable. Redesign materials. These kinds of improvements can be implemented overnight. Really, with enough political will, we do not have to wait for a master plan. The Bowery and Canal is a perfect example, a block away from where this unfortunate tragedy occurred with this senior pedestrian getting killed this weekend. Just one block away, there's a huge capital reinvestment that took place. And I believe it came out of a 2007 plan, but it took many, many years to pour that concrete, and even so, despite the many years of planning and the many dollars of capital reconstruction, someone can get killed a block away. And it's really, you can't put that timeline on a safety redesign for a corridor-wide project, because you're really just, the amount of time it's going to take to get the approval or the materials or the treatments, by the time that treatment goes in, the traffic conditions are already different than when you started the planning process. So we cannot afford to wait. And there is a more affordable option. Do you feel the same way about those interim
I mean,
materials?
I think obviously I certainly wouldn't say to anybody, well, keep it still dangerous and shitty for pedestrians to walk on while we figure out whether or not we can get a fully protected bike lane going on both sides of the street. I mean, obviously not a it doesn't have to be an all or nothing kind of thing, especially with a street. biked on it a couple times getting here, and yeah, I mean it's not anything to make it better in the interim is I'm pretty much okay with. And I guess talking about the politics of it, you mentioned big government, big local government, or down to the community board, and you mentioned Councilmember Margaret Chin seemed to have some interest in it. But I mean, have you gotten any political allies in this fight? Have you heard from what they want out of this? To see like and not as give me this. Like, what do they want to see the street become? What's the politics side of this look like right now?
Well, being that we started this campaign where, Mayor de Blasio is kind of running thin, when we kicked up a lot of our advocacy, I'm not really sure he heard our resounding cries for fixed canal all the way in Iowa. It's not really sure that my megaphone can capture that great of a distance, but I know our local leaders, namely Speaker of City Council, Corey Johnson, in the district that's just on the northern edge of the Holland Tunnel, the most lethal part of the Canal Street corridor. Well, either end is pretty lethal, but the Holland Tunnel may be the most miserable, insufferable part of the Canal Street corridor. I know that both teams, Councilmember Chin's team and Speaker Johnson's team, are aware of the many street design needs. The Holland Tunnel actually, the area just north of Canal Street on Hudson Street, was just approved through the Community Board 2 process as having a continuation of the Hudson Street protected bike lane approved. Right. But again, through one of those weird capital redesigns, and we're not going to see the manifestation of that bike lane until 2022. So, maybe 10 years later, after the rest of Hudson Street in the Village, which some of our teammates here might be familiar with, that protected bike lane, the continuation of that is approved. So, I know Speaker Johnson's very interested in the safety of cyclists and their safe passage. He himself has, through some of the 14th Street busway conversations, been a real pioneer in saying, these designs that are this interim material can be tweaked. We can actually work with the city residents. We can work with city demands to cater to the ebb and flow. And again, we circumvent that endless capital redesign project. So excellent work on that, Speaker Johnson. I appreciate the kind of ability to be malleable when we're talking about street redesigns and asking the City Department of Transportation to continually modulate, do better, tweak those designs and make them better time and time again. No one design is going to last forever, maybe.
So I had one last question for you, and it's kind of around the even philosophy of of organizing these kind of things. I mean, in the course of my research, I found an Old Streets blog article that itself made reference to a canal area transportation study that was in 2002, and they didn't come out with any recommendations other than widen the sidewalks, and that took 9 years for them to figured out that brilliant idea. And like you said, this has been people have known for decades that Canal is not an ideal place to live, to even to work if you were right here. It's barely even good to drive through. If you're a driver, there's some honking right there. it just sucks. I mean, it's hard to say it any other way. So I mean, how do you kind of keep up the ability to go, we're just going to keep doing this, and we're going to keep running into the wall, and we're going to keep fighting for this thing that it seems there hasn't been hostility, but it's been like a kind of indifference. It's felt like from the larger political structures in the city that it just kind of keeps flowing under the radar. It's like, how do you keep getting out there to go, this is a very important thing that we have to fix?
Well, coming back to the testament of public process, I think that coming out to the community board meeting will be one small signal to our elected officials that we must urgently act and that we can do it more quickly, and we can't afford to wait for another study like CAT's Canal Area Transportation Study, Year of the Rat, cats. There's just a lot of animals that really want Canal Street to be redesigned, from the fish buried in the concrete somewhere. But that's the way that advocacy works. You'll be there, I hope, at our community board meeting to send a strong signal to the mayor that Canal Street needs action. This is a federal election year. Don't get me wrong, Dave. I feel like sometimes our local champions at home get a little distracted and big value virtue, pulpit
Right.
punditing. So I think we all struggle at a local level, good press included. Thank you again for having us. But the way we get these messages across is just simply showing up and repeating this advocacy. We have a federal election year right now, but we could see redesigns this year as well. 2020 could be big for Canal Street, and I'm really hopeful that we will see some improvements, that our voices will be heard. We've reached 1,000 petition signatures, but that doesn't mean that all is lost whether the federal election outcome is what we want, because the local elections are the next year, so we can still continue to work with our elected leaders in moving the city planners' hands onto drawing more beautiful, amenity-filled, quality-of-life streetscapes for Canal Street.
Great. And Chelsea brings up an important point. Remember your local elections in 2021, because you got to live here. There's a lot going on around there, but you live right here. So, that's an important thing to keep in mind. This has been Chelsea Yamada from Transportation Alternatives. I'm Dave Colon of Streets Blog. Bye, Racket. I don't really know how to end this.